Welcome to Behind the Scenes, the podcast where we delve into the diverse perspectives of the brilliant minds at Entura, one of the world's most experienced power and water consulting firms. This podcast comes to you today from Nipaluna, Hobart, the traditional country of the Moina people of the Southeast Nation. We acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people and their ongoing connection to culture and country, and the traditional owners of other lands people are joining from today. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today. Join us as we explore the stories of talented individuals shaping a sustainable future, discover who they are, uncover the intricacies of their role, and explore what drives their passion. Get ready for an insider's view into the heartbeat of Entura and the journey toward a more sustainable tomorrow. Jamie Cowan grew up in Scotland and is a civil engineer with more than 20 years international dams experience. Jamie's natural curiosity has driven him to understand the whole process from designing and building infrastructure projects. With experience in engineering consulting as well as an asset owner, Jamie brings his wealth of knowledge to the conversation and answers the big questions, including who makes the best whiskey. So where I want to start today is, who are you?
Yeah, my name's Jamie. I'm from Scotland. I'm a civil engineer in the water industry, and in some cases I've been involved with dams.
So I want to go right back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Scotland, rural Scotland, near Glasgow, and one of the things that we all know about Scotland is it rains and it's windy, and what we've done as a nation is adapted to that over the years, and we've got an indoor culture, as we all know about. But from an infrastructure point of view, one of the things that people talked about when I was growing up, where there were hydroelectric dams hidden somewhere in the mountains. So there was an idea that was planted in my head that there is big infrastructure out there doing something. You might not be able to see it.
So when did those thoughts start to kind of come into your mind? Was it in the kind of primary school years, the high school years? Were you getting into kind of mathematics and thinking and kind of joining those dots between the mathematics and those infrastructure projects?
Well, to start with, it did happen in primary school, and it would be mentioned occasionally by teachers or just people that you would meet. And I think that was down to Scotland having a lot of engineers have come from Scotland, they've grown up in Scotland, moved abroad, and they've not come from an elite background or a moneyed background. It's typically been from just the normal people. So it was always talked about that it was something that anyone could get involved in if they wanted to. When I went to high school, obviously, as you're talking about with the subjects that you study, you're then thinking, oh, you could apply that, maybe a geography or mathematics or physics or whatever, but it really wasn't until the end of high school that I thought maybe I could be an engineer.
And did you have a natural bent towards those mathematically sciencey type subjects? I
think I did. I was always curious about how things worked, how things happened, and following on from that, how does big infrastructure get there? Like, you look, if you're a child and you look at a big building or a dam or a road bridge or something, you're going, how did that happen? Mm. Like, you don't see all the bits and pieces, you just see the finished product. So I suppose it was a journey for me to put all those bits together, and did like playing with Lego and Meccano and doing drawings. So I suppose there was that sort of side of thing as well.
Was there any overt or obvious influence from parents or family? Did you have engineers in the family? Was it kind of an outside the box thing for your family?
I suppose it was a little bit outside the box. My parents weren't engineers. None of the family members were engineers. There was teachers in there. There was farmers, people that worked in banks, all sorts of things like that, but not engineers per se. I think one of my parents' friends might have been an electrical engineer, but he was more in management by that time. So I didn't have those kind of influences, but there were enough documentaries on TV about British engineers, not specifically Scottish, that you got the idea of, okay, that's what they've done in their life, that's how they went about it. So I think my influences were more outside, as you're saying, yeah.
Yeah. So as you finished high school,
yeah,
you have no doubt looked at universities and started to have a bit of a look about where you might go and what you might do. Was engineering at the top of the list?
It was by that time, because by that time, the last couple of years of high school, I was looking at the prospectuses, I was talking to friends about what they were wanting to do, and finding out by that time, they're going, oh, that's unusual. They wanted to be a lawyer or a psychologist or get into IT or whatever. But none of those kind of things interested me as much as my curiosity of how do big infrastructure get there. So when I asked more questions and went on the open days and all those sort of things, it became obvious that a civil engineering degree would answer a lot of those questions.
And at that time, you were thinking more about the infrastructure side of things more broadly, roads, bridges, and not necessarily in the renewable space? Or did you have an idea that renewables was...
Look, so this was the early 90s and renewables were being talked about. There was the early stages of wind farms going up in Europe, and hydroelectric, as I said earlier, had been there for, 80 or 90 years at that time. So they were in the background as parts of big infrastructure, and no, at that time there wasn't a desire to say, I must do something renewable, but dams looked interesting amongst other things.
From what I understand, in Australia, when you go into an engineering degree, your first year is a bit of a broad brush approach to multiple different streams of engineering, and then following that you pick a specialisation. Is it a similar thing in Scotland, or did you need to pick civil from the beginning?
Well, you generally pick your specialisation from the beginning, and some of those classes are shared, particularly mechanical and electrical. There's quite a lot. We didn't have so much. The civil one was quite tailored from the beginning. So I think maths was something that was shared, but the rest of the stuff was very, very specific to civil, which I was quite happy with. I thought, right, we're getting into this straight away. So I don't really know much about mechanical or electrical on that. So, yeah.
And how did a young Jamie find uni life in Scotland?
I liked it. It was, it felt like a natural progression after primary school. Everything's done for you. Secondary school, you're getting to make more choices, getting a bit more personal freedom. And then by the time you're at university, it's pretty much on you. But for me, I wasn't ready to move away to a different city, so I went to Glasgow University. So a lot of my friends were going there, so it was an easy transition. And then you get into the university life and find that, okay, you have to balance your education with your social life. So it was lots of lessons were learnt.
And looking back, what sort of student were you?
In the early days, the first couple of years, I did enough to get through to the next year, and I specifically had to look at the things that interested me. But then in the final couple of years, I focused a bit more and got into a lot more detail, and found as I was getting into the detail, I was enjoying the detail. So it started to snowball a bit from there. So by the end, by the time of doing the essays, the dissertations, the projects, I was happier with it. It was more across the whole thing.
Once university's wrapped up entirely, what was your first job out of uni?
So I worked for a consultancy in Glasgow, and I got a job in their water department, and they divided that department into a number of sub-departments. So I worked in their dams department as my first job, and they set me out designing retaining walls and drainage for dam upgrades.
Yeah, interesting that you've had that thought in high school around the dams and the existence of these things, and then you've kind of gravitated towards civil, and then gravitated more towards water, and then ended up being in the dam space.
I know.
Pretty much straight away. So do you think that was a maybe a subconscious or a purposeful thing, or do you think it just kind of happened that way?
There's possibly a subconscious thing there, and again, I've thought about it. It may just be that's where a lot of jobs were available. Maybe that's if I had a natural inclination towards the water subjects, maybe I was demonstrating that in some way, because it wasn't really by design. I didn't go deliberately saying, oh, I must work there or I must do that, because at that time getting a job was, that's the main thing. Just give me a job.
That's the goal.
So yeah, it was a bit of that, very much.
And how long did you stay in that role?
I stayed with that company for about 4 years, and then I moved to another company for another few years before coming to Australia. But it was all water related. Yeah.
And what sort of projects?
So it was quite a mix. So there was dams projects, and
as in new dams?
No, the dams in the UK. The last big dams were built in the early 1980s. So we were more into a maintenance sort of program by that time, looking at much older dams, and sort of safety programs, looking at dam break studies, flood studies, that sort of thing. So I was involved in some of those sort of studies. That was another eye-opening thing of how you analyse these things, because we didn't learn that at university. So
during that time, coming out of uni, doing your first couple of jobs, that tends to be a pretty big learning curve.
Yeah.
Is there any particular lessons that you've learned or mentors that you've had that have given you something that you carry with you today?
There's a couple of things. One of them was, as I was saying, when I designed retaining walls as my first job, and at that point it was a desk exercise. I looked at the plans, said, okay, we can fit them here, do this, do that. So a couple of years later, when they were actually constructing the upgrade to the dam, I was on site, so I was watching these things being built that I'd designed. So it was really exciting watching that coming to life. But at the same time, I was asking questions of the contractor and the site team, if there was any ways of improving that, or if there's anything they're saying, well, we wouldn't normally do that, but it works here. So having that discussion to sort of complete the loop of your design idea, taking it to site, is it actually going to work? Is there a better way of doing it? How do people build things compared to how do people design things? That's definitely something that's been in my mind since then. No matter what it is you're designing or what your idea is to try and think about everyone who's going to be involved in that process. What do they do? What's their input? So that was definitely a big learning for me.
It's interesting, isn't there? There's a link between your early curiosity on what is this infrastructure and how does it get there, to then designing it, and then to maintaining that curiosity on not only how do I design it, but what do all these people do and how does it all come together? Would you say that's a normal approach? Is that what the other engineers of your ilk were doing, going out and talking to the people on site, or is that an innate thing that you've kind of
I think it's possibly a spectrum of behaviour. It's some people, if they're outgoing, will go out and talk to everyone and find out how to do it. Some engineers are particularly shy. They maybe do less of that, maybe have to be encouraged to go and find out how to do that. But it did answer my question of how do big infrastructure get there? That it's the people. It's not one person saying, well, I've designed this, it's now done. It's all the people involved in all the process. It didn't quite occur to me at the time that I was answering a question that I'd asked 10 years before. But yeah, that is one of the things.
And again, just thinking about that period of time and the learning curve, there's invariably going to be a big stuff up in there somewhere.
You'd think.
But no.
Look, there might have been mistakes made or small things that I've learned along the way. I can't remember anything that was a showstopper. Nothing really comes to mind, but definitely being on site in particular, where you're having daily contact with the people who are building it and you're presenting plans to them and discussing them. There were conversations of saying, can we change that? And we'd look at it on site and we'd both see, there is a better way of doing that now that we know what we found out by digging up the ground that we didn't know before that. So it's those kind of learnings definitely helped as well.
So during that period of time, were there any particularly funny stories or wild characters that you met? I would imagine with the Scottish culture that there might be a bit of shenanigans going on.
You would think that. And I think that was one of the things that I thought going into this as a very young engineer, oh, this is going to be great. But what I found was at all levels, everyone took their job quite seriously. And I'm not sure whether by that time there was quite a strong OHS culture or HR culture or whether people just didn't want to lose their jobs. But notwithstanding that, it was enjoyable to work with them. That I'm not saying engineering's not funny, but it's I think it was that one thing that I did take away was everyone's here for a purpose. It's not just an any old job. It's something they want to do at all levels. So that was quite an eye-opener.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? And again, harking back to what you're saying about that curiosity, the people that are involved, they're involved because they want to be involved in these amazing projects. It's not just a job and a paycheck.
That was a big thing, because going back to school years, it was something that I would hear my parents' friends talking about people they knew that really didn't like their jobs, but they felt trapped because of their commitments. So they were always, the biggest advice was get something that you want to do, which engineering has provided that for me, which has been great. And it really was quite heartening to me to find that the more I got involved, the more projects that I worked on, I found a lot of like-minded people that also felt the same way, that, you know.
So what first piqued your interest in Australia?
I'd always wanted to come to Australia since primary school, possibly even before, I'm not sure. It's whether I'd seen something on the TV or movies or heard about it or whatever else, it was always there as, that'll be good to go there. Maybe
the Paul Hogan ads had an effect.
Look, everything helps. Everything helps.
So what year did you start investigating the possibility of coming to Australia?
Again, I think that's a bit of a slow burn, because when I was at university, I'd met people and had some friends who would do a gap year or a gap 6 months or come out during vacation time. And not just from Australia, some people went to other countries in the world. We get mixed reports. No one ever said a bad word about Australia. It was always very positive. Everyone saying, geez, I'd move there.
So when you floated the idea with the family, what was their reaction?
I think they thought, he'll go for a year, maybe 2, get it out of his system, then come home.
And that was how long ago?
I've been here nearly 20 years now.
Okay. Is it out of your system yet?
I go back to see my family every year.
And?
I come back to Australia.
Fair enough. So no doubt there's some application process. Did you need to find work before you left Scotland? Was it a matter of come here and kind of see what happens?
It was a bit of both, actually. The ideal situation was to get sponsored by a company to bring you across, but at that time there wasn't a lot of that happening, because obviously every country's got rules about we have to have jobs for everyone who's here first. But what was discussed when I got in touch with people in Australia, they said, look, if you happen to be in Australia, drop in and see us, and then we'll talk about what we can do for you. Because I think it's a lot easier to do things if you're actually here. So I came across on a visa, and then I did some more detailed looking for work when I came across.
Okay. And what was the first job that you landed?
So I got a job in a consultancy in Melbourne, and I worked in their water department. Sounds like a familiar story. And it was subdivided into other sub-departments. So they said, oh, you know about dams? We've got an opening. Would you like to do some dams work? So it was a relatively easy transition, and a little bit of deja vu. But what I found was everything out here is on a much bigger scale.
Did you find there was a difference between the way engineers work in the UK or in Scotland versus how they work in Australia?
Not really. No, I've thought about this quite a lot. Engineers are engineers.
The reason I say that, and the reason I ask that question, is my brother is a civil engineer, and
right.
he went from Melbourne to work in London.
Okay.
And his view was that the reverence with which engineers are treated in the UK is different to what it is here. So he's working in the building industry.
Okay.
And it was very much a case of the engineer sets a standard and the developer or builder works to that standard. Whereas here he kind of felt that it might be a little bit more where the developer or the builder is putting pressure back on the engineer to make it work to a design or budget or schedule or whatever it might be. So that's kind of the reference of the question, but I guess you're saying that not really. You found it's been...
Look, I think the building industry does vary around the world, and commercial pressures are huge, and it's very possible that in the UK that may or may not have changed. But from the industry I'm in, which is more about public large infrastructure, there tends to be, thankfully, the engineers are held in quite high esteem both in the UK and Australia. Budgets are still a constraint. You can't just design endlessly. But no, I think the difference would probably be public works versus commercial.
Okay. So after your time working in that consultancy in Melbourne, what was the next step?
So I'd got to a stage where I'd been in consultancy for quite a long time, and obviously working on multidisciplinary projects, you get to meet people, all sorts of things, and not just other engineers, get to work with economists and business analysts, all sorts of different things. And one of the things that came up in conversation, and not just from one person, quite a few, was if you only work in one side of the fence, be it consultancy or contracting or asset owner, you can become an expert in that, but you'll never truly understand how the other side thinks or works. So I looked at the two options and I thought, okay, do I go into contracting and get down in the dirt, or do I go to an asset owner and find out how do these things work? Why do they work? How did they get there? And so I took a chance, and I thought, well, I'll move to the country Victoria, and I took a job with an asset owner, a water authority, and I worked in their project management department, which was mostly about ongoing maintenance than anything new or big. There was occasional sort of renewals and modernisation and that sort of thing going on, and that was a great experience because I was learning again. I'd brought my consultancy experience, which it really helped with the role, and it helped when some of my colleagues were dealing with consultants. I'd say, well, this is how they're thinking. But it allowed me to broaden my vision of how big things get there.
Yeah, and project management is a whole nother skill set.
Yes, it is.
How did you find, did you do any formal education in project management, or did you kind of just transition in and learn on the job?
Well, I did do some formal education on that at the consultancy I joined when I came to Australia, because they were promoting that as a skill in itself. As it turned out, I had done some project management in Scotland, but I hadn't done any training courses on it. It was more a case of copying what other engineers were doing, being mentored by more senior engineers, just because that was the company needs to see these things. Have you checked this has happened? So it was all discussed as, this is engineering, this is how you make things work. But I enjoyed and appreciated the formalised approach to it, because it made me understand, oh, that's why you do that, and that's why you do that, and that's the benefit of doing these things. So by the time I'd got to the Water Authority, I felt more comfortable that I could do project management on an engineering basis. And they were quite good as well. They were taking that quite seriously. So they had a programme of training their engineers and project managers as well in this, because they wanted to be seen as, this is how we manage things. So they could tailor that to their own needs.
So from there, you've come across to Entura. And you've kind of got the best of both worlds here. We own, we operate, and we consult.
Yeah.
So you've kind of brought your consulting background with that little bit of asset owner experience.
Yeah.
And how have you found that has helped in your role at Entura?
I think it's been a great foundation to come in on, because I think if I'd come in with only the consultancy side, I might have had I might have had less appreciation for what an asset owner has to do, what their constraints are. So it may have resulted in longer conversations, more explanations, but I think it's helped me understand my opposite numbers in hydro and the other asset owners that we work with.
What are the big projects you've got on at the moment?
So I am the project manager for a couple of dam surveillance programs. So as part of ongoing maintenance and upkeep of dams, responsible owners will have their dams inspected annually and then do a more in-depth inspection every 5 years, every 20 years. So I'm managing a program of dam inspections. So it's quite a few dams within that program for a couple of asset owners. That keeps me quite busy.
Within the portfolio of dams that we look after for Hydro Tasmania, there's quite a spread of different types and different construction methods.
Yes.
Can you kind of talk me through a little bit of what it's like working on such a broad range of assets?
It's great. It's the biggest toy box in the world. So it's every engineer's dream to come in to something where we've got so many assets like that. And if you're in dams, this is, this is the gold standard, because there's, as you said, there's such a variety of them, and each dam is a unique structure. Like, you can have a cookie cutter approach to doing that if you're building a portfolio of dams, but each site is different, the foundations are different, the catchments are different, the weather, the aspect, all of these things are different, the available materials, what's the best material to build that dam out of, and as you're saying, what type of dam is it? Because each of those dams tell a story, because sometimes in times of economic hardship where materials are scarce, they'll be going for, well, we need to use less concrete. Or if you're building up in the mountains, you want to use the material that's already there. You don't want to be trucking in thousands and thousands of truckloads of material from somewhere else. It's expensive and you're polluting the atmosphere.
So, Jamie, what do you find the highlights are working with Entura?
I think it's the people. Like, when I come in the morning, although I've got work to do, and there's some great stuff that I love getting involved in. I'm an engineer, as I've told you earlier. It's the people that draw me back into the office, because obviously during COVID we weren't allowed to come to the office, and even now some of us are back in all the time, some in half the week, some people who are a bit more remote see a bit less often. That's what keeps me coming back in, and it's about the things we can do face to face. It's about going out for lunch, it's about welcoming new starts with a morning tea, getting to know people from different cultures, because we do, in the Melbourne office, we've certainly got people from all over the world in there. I've not worked extensively in the Hobart office to confirm if you're doing the same. People from Scotland, all sorts of things.
Yeah. So being a well-rounded and quite well experienced engineer in your field, do you find yourself taking on mentor roles?
Absolutely. And sometimes it happens almost by osmosis, because you've got a job to work on, and with the stage that I'm at, I'm managing projects, and we're training up younger engineers, junior engineers, people who are just like me, coming in going, right, got my degree, what do I do now? And we set them tasks to do, and there's obviously sort of a pyramid that maybe I'm not teaching them exactly how to design something or to model something, but maybe talking to someone who's managing some of those new starts. And aside from those technical sort of sides of things, it's really just showing them this is how an office works. This is how you interact with all of the other people in the team, people outside of the team, and that you can go and talk to people that you're not actually on the same project, and that you can really spread your wings, find out what the whole company does.
At the heart of it, we're about renewable energy and a sustainable future.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
Look, it means that we are possibly going to minimise or reverse the trends of climate change, which I think we're seeing quite a lot of these days, things getting a bit more, weather getting very unusual. I think we're in a great place to get towards net zero. The way my involvement in that is with the maintenance and upkeep, inspection of the hydro dams. And the hydro dams for me provide the base load, and they provide the filling in the gaps where you've sometimes got dropouts from wind and solar. So I think collectively, with Entura being across all of those things, we've got a renewables team that we're covering the whole circle, the whole piece.
It's a really exciting time to be in the industry, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's and that is one of the reasons that I chose to work for Entura, was their commitment to renewables, and the fact that they've got so many hydro dams. When I looked into it a bit more, that they were doing solar farms and wind farms as well. I'd previously just thought, they just do hydro because it's Hydro Tasmania. But it's I'd say it's the number one industry to be in Australia right now, if not the world.
Where do you see your future?
Well, I think at Entura I'm going to maintain being project manager, program manager, and mentoring the younger engineers as they come in, and hoping I can pass on something that I've learned to them, do's and don'ts, and excuse me. Hopefully I can pass on some useful advice to them, so when it comes their turn they can do the same, and so we go.
Jamie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for joining us on this insightful journey behind the scenes at Entura. We hope you've gained valuable insights into the incredible individuals driving a sustainable innovation. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations as we continue to explore the people and stories shaping our sustainable future. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook, and find out more about the work we do at entura.com.au. Until next time, this is Mark signing off from Entura's Behind the Scenes, where sustainability meets inspiration.